Let's go to Psalm 96 together. Psalm 96 together. Some of you probably know this psalm. This is, if you don't know the psalm, you probably know some verses from this psalm. This is one of those that has some pretty commonly recognized verses. Maybe you've been to a missions conference that had several verses, or this psalm is their theme. This is the Declare His Glory Among the Nations. Maybe you've read a book with that title. I think Piper had a book with that. No, that's Let the Nations Be Glad. One of the big missions books is Declare His Glory Among the Nations. And anyway, so maybe you have some familiarity with this psalm. This is a beautiful psalm. It's been a little while since we were in the Psalms on Wednesdays, and so we are in a series of the royal hymns. In other words, these are psalms dedicated to the kingship of God, the sovereignty of God, and starting in 92 all the way through Psalm 100. There's royal psalms really the rest of the way, but these are specific psalms because in Psalm 92, and then he takes a slight break from it in 93. And then 95, 96, 97, and Psalm 100 all say, the Lord reigns. Psalm 92 says that as well. So we know very clearly what we're talking about here once we get into the 90s, the sovereignty of God. Very much different than the 90s that I grew up in. That was not the theme of the 90s. I grew up in the 90s, so that dates me. But anyway, we are back in the royal psalms here, and I would encourage you to think about your walk with the Lord, or your praise in your walk with the Lord, the way that this verse begins, this psalm begins. So start with me in verse 1, and just note the first line together. Oh, sing to the Lord a new song. And what the psalmist is getting at is that we should have, and so this is introductory, we should have a praise that is proportionate to our understanding specifically of God's mercy. And so this psalm is going to draw us into the basic idea that our praise is proportionate to what we know about God. And then the psalm is going to give us some things to know about God so that we worship Him the right way. So from the very outset, you can ask the question, what governs or guides your worship? What governs or guides your worship? And as we think about our lives, and as we think about maybe even the new year, and as we think about maybe reflecting on the last year, I think what can happen is what governs and guides our worship is our life, or the happenings of our life, or the understandings or misunderstandings of our life, as opposed to what the psalmist is getting at here. And we're to sing a new song to the Lord. And so maybe the psalm is actually going to give you some new content that should govern and guide your worship. So keeping these things in mind, that we want God to help us see Him and understand the psalm in such a way that He provides new categories for our worship. Let's pray. We'll begin to work through it together. God, we're thankful for this time to study your word. We're thankful that we can come to a God who is over all things. And Lord, we recognize your sovereign rule in our lives. And not only do we recognize that we need it, and sometimes we know it, but we don't always know that we need it, or we don't operate like we need it. And so I pray that you take the psalm and you would help us, you'd convince us again of our need for your sovereignty. Because it's a difficult thing for us, not always to understand. There's depths of riches and complexities to your sovereignty that are outside of our intellectual capacity, but more so, it's hard to grapple with sometimes. And so I pray that you'd continue to clarify your sovereignty to us. And I ask these things through Christ. Amen. Well, I don't always use kind of moments from culture or current events in the way that I integrate into my preaching. But I was talking about it with someone earlier because I think everyone's talking about it, and actually it's an interesting way to think about this text. And so, how many of you were familiar with what happened Monday night during an NFL game? Okay. Most people know, so I know because it was a Bengals game, so I was watching it, and it was one of the craziest things I've ever seen. And so, you watch football, and there's always injuries, and they go to injury break and whatever. And so I was watching this game, and there was a tackle, and a player stood up, and he just fell right back down. And they went to break, and then they went to break again, and they went to break again, and they went to break again, and they went to break, I think 4 times they went to break. They finally showed the field with an ambulance on it. And before that shot, it was a stretcher. Then it was an ambulance. And then you're seeing players, full-grown men, weeping on the football field, like big, tough guys. Because what happened is this player went into cardiac arrest, and a lot of these players thought that he died on the field because they were resuscitating him on the field. And so obviously it was shocking, and it was like, what do we do here? Because it was supposed to be entertaining, and now what do we do? And so these poor sports analysts, they kept switching to them like they had to make sense of this. Like that's impossible. They didn't sign up for that. And then eventually the game got canceled, which is what it should have happened, and or postponed. And so why do I even bring that up? Because the next day, and even now, if you're on social media, and even if you're not, the religious reaction to the player's name is Damar Hamlin, to this incident, this health incident with Damar Hamlin on a football field, the religious reaction has been, astounding. Sports analysts that I know are absolute degenerate people saying we should pray for this guy. I watched one sports analyst in particular. I saw a clip of him, and he said this. He said it to one of the other guys he co-hosts with. His name is, I can't remember his last name. His first name is Nick. He's one of those guys who loves to be controversial on purpose. But he was very sincere. He said, my wife and you, the other sports analyst that he works with, are both very deeply religious people. And I'm not. And this is what he said. In times like this, I wish I had somewhere to go. It was astounding. And psalms like this give us clarity and give us a place to go. And so I think in times like when we see the world react with a desire to appeal to something bigger than themselves, the people of God should be leading the way with the doctrine of God's sovereignty. And so keeping that introductory material in mind, even as, maybe you've seen that hashtag, pray for Damar, or you've seen just even briefly what's happened. These are times when conversations are actually really easy to have about God's sovereignty. So where do we go? Whether it's a football player who collapses in the field, or a family member who collapses, or you who are really sick, or you've lost a loved one, or you're struggling with a situation in your life, where do we go? Psalm 96. Sing to the Lord a new song. Sing to the Lord, all the earth. Sing to the Lord, bless His name. Tell of His salvation from day to day. Declare His glory among the nations, His marvelous works among all the peoples. For great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised. He is to be feared above all gods, for all the gods of the peoples are worthless idols. But the Lord made the heavens. Splendor and majesty are before him. Strength and beauty are in his sanctuary. Ascribe to the Lord, O families of the peoples. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Bring an offering and come into his courts. Worship the Lord in the splendor of holiness. Tremble before him, all the earth. Say among the nations, the Lord reigns. Yes, the world is established. It shall never be moved. He will judge the peoples with equity. Let the heavens be glad, and let the earth rejoice. Let the sea roar, and all that fills it. Let the field exult, and everything in it. Then shall all the trees of the forest sing for joy before the Lord. For he comes to judge the earth. He will judge the world in righteousness, and the peoples in his faithfulness. Where do we go in times of confusion? Where does the world that does not know God, in their heart of hearts, deeply desire to go? They want a constant. And so let us discuss together again from the Psalms the constancy of God's sovereignty. Well, this is an explosive psalm. I mean, it's just abounding with joy and victory and beauty and majesty and awe. And it's pretty easy to break down structurally. I don't know if you have a translation that breaks it down for you, but this one's very easy to kind of compartmentalize. And it's easy with the repetition of words. Okay, so the first kind of set of repeating words is sing, sing in verses 1 through 6, because it begins with sing verse 1, sing verse 2, and then declare verse 3, and then it's going to give us all these reasons. And then there's the repetition of the word ascribe in verses 7 to 9. Ascribe, and then worship. The similar idea. And then 10 stands alone, and I'll show you why 10 stands alone in just a few minutes. And then you see very clearly verses 11 and 12 introduce that final paragraph, or the final lines, let. So the repetition of words breaks down the psalm for us. So let's work with this first paragraph together, these first lines together, verses 1 through 6. And note that the psalmist invites us to sing to the glorious King. Sing to the glorious King. Oh, sing to the Lord a new song. As I already mentioned, this word is this word or this concept that he means here, oh, sing to the Lord a new song. He's not just appealing for new music, although that's certainly a part of it. You know, obviously the psalmist had no problem with new music because all of the psalms were new songs at one point. So there's a certain logical perspective here that obviously he's saying we should sing new songs to the Lord. But really it's more in relation to our understandings of the Lord. As the Lord's mercies are new every morning, so we are to be singing new songs to the Lord, because there's always something to sing about. The Christian's music should be in direct response to the mercy they've been shown. Sing to the Lord a new song. And then we have the scope. This is something that we see constantly throughout the royal psalms. There's a specified scope. Sometimes it's the people of Israel. And usually it's broader than that. Usually it's all peoples. And sometimes it starts in Israel and it gets even bigger, and then it becomes all the earth. And this one, it's straight to all the earth. Sing to the Lord a new song. Sing to the Lord all the earth. Sing to the Lord, bless his name, tell of his salvation from day to day, or to express his redemptive works, declare his glory among the nations, his marvelous works among all the people. So again, all the people should be praising God. And all the people should know of the glory of God, because you should be singing it and you should be declaring it. This is often why this is a missional psalm. I've heard the psalm in conferences and And it lends itself that way, because the idea is that we're declaring and we're singing the glory of God so extensively that we're inviting other people to praise Him with us. For the Lord is great. This is one of the words for His magnitude, His quality. The quality of the Lord is great. Therefore, He is greatly to be praised. He is to be feared above all gods. For all the gods of the peoples are worthless idols. So Gentile nations, their idols are worthless. They are made. And then the contrast, there's actually there's two contrasts the psalmist makes between God and other gods. Capital G, big God, and lower G, other gods. The first one is actually obvious. For all the gods of the peoples are worthless idols, but the Lord made. What's the contrast there? No one made the Lord. The Lord is the maker. So He is not a made idol. He Himself is the maker. That's the first contrast that the psalmist makes between God and other gods. The other one's more subtle, which is where you have to understand the ancient language. The word that the psalmist repeatedly uses for glory in this first line of strophes is actually the word heaviness. His heaviness. And so literally the psalmist is impressing upon us the idea that God is qualitatively something. He's real, not like other gods. Splendor and majesty are before Him. Strength and beauty are in His sanctuary. It's astounding to begin, just to start to think about what the beauty of God is. I mean, I think we're often astounded of what the strength of God is. I was going to do the former question, but I better not. So there are several ways that God expresses His strength in the Old Testament, and usually His strength is also like set right alongside His awesome nature. In the Old Testament, sometimes it's in the form of a storm, that where you see God, you see a storm. This is obviously most probably drastically seen up on Sinai. That when God was up there, I mean, that like lightning was happening. It was a big storm. Think about the surprise from Elijah when God wasn't in the fire and He wasn't in the earthquake and He wasn't in the wind, because God's presence and His where they understood Him to be seen were often thought of synonymous with strength and power. Some New Testament, I'm not fully convinced on this, some New Testament scholars even suggest that when Jesus is calming the storm, it's mirroring the presence of God out on the water, because the Old Testament saints would have thought of God, the presence of God, synonymously with a storm. It's an interesting idea. But what about the beauty of God? You ever just stopped and thought about that for a moment? What does it mean that God is wrapped in beauty and majesty? And when I say what does it mean and think about it, I mean, it's not like I have an answer. We enjoy His projected beauty on creation. I mean, probably all of you have seen something that's taken your breath away at some point, astounded you. And if you haven't, you need to get outside Indiana. There's nice things in Indiana too, but you know what I mean. We see His projected beauty on creation. We see the beauty of light. We enjoy the glory of a sunrise against an ocean. The power and beauty of when beams of light just start to shine over a mountain as the sun rises. That orange and pink as it sets. And those are just projections of the person of God. when we just stop and we meditate for a moment on what could the beauty of God entail? I mean, it's astounding. Because that's really all we can work with, the beauty that we perceive. Strength and beauty are in His sanctuary. Wouldn't it be great to see that? Sing to the glorious King. And then he's going to repeat this word ascribe, which is essentially the same word that you and I understand as give to the Lord something. So, first of all, sing to the glorious King. Second, in verses 7 and 9, he's going to repeat the same kind of ideas. We're supposed to be giving the Lord praise, and it has to do with scope because of His glory and beauty. Ascribe to the Lord, O families of the peoples. So first of all, sing to the glorious King. Second of all, give to the great King. What are we supposed to give Him? Ascribe to the Lord, O families of the peoples. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Again, worship. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due His name. Again, the idea that as He begins with our worship is to be proportionate of our understanding of God. So as we have new understanding of Him, so we are to sing new songs. So as we understand the glory that is due Him, we continue to worship Him. So the more that we understand, the more that we know that the more glory we know that He is due. We never get to a point when our understanding of God where it's like, well, I think I've given God enough glory now. That suffices. Because the more we know of God, the more glory we know we have to give. And then bring or give the Lord a sacrifice. Bring an offering and come into His courts. The temple terminology. Worship the Lord in the splendor. Again, another word for the beauty of God. The splendor of holiness. Tremble before Him all the earth. So, give Him glory, give Him praise, give Him reverence. Tremble before Him, all the earth. So He's great in beauty, and He is great in His powerful nature, His awesome, and we so underuse that word. I mean, it's just so common for us. But when we say awesome, we mean literally something that brings awe. It's supposed to be unique to God, truly, that word. Awesome in His glory, almost to the point where it's scary. Like, this is just overwhelming. I mean, that's how Moses felt. That's how he was supposed to feel. What did Peter, James, and John do when they saw the radiating glory of Christ in the transfiguration? Face to the ground. I mean, this is too much. And then Peter does what he always does, and he opens his mouth, right? We need to do something. And Jesus says, no. You need to be still. And you need to pray. What a scene. Just wait with me. What a scene. This is the beauty of God and the awesomeness of God. Wouldn't it be great to see this? And then verse 10 stands alone. I said verse 10 stands alone because it's interesting the way the psalmist does this. So he has two very similar structures. Sing, sing, for here's the reasons. Verses 1 through 6. 7 through 9, ascribe, or give Him praise, give Him praise. Here's the reason, because of His splendor and His name. And then we're again invited to praise or declare among the nations. But this verse stands alone. There's nothing repeated here. It doesn't have the exact structure as the others because it actually begins to deal with a different theological idea, and that is His judgment. So it stands alone in its structure and it stands alone in its theme. Why would the psalmist do this? To emphasize it. Actually, all of Psalm 96 could be condensed into verse 10. It's like when I'm preaching and I give you a main idea. I'm trying to condense it all down into one idea. Verse 10 is like his main idea if he were preaching it. And I'll show you that in just a moment. But let's read it. Say among the nations, the Lord reigns. There it is. Our royal sovereign declaration that we've seen throughout the Psalm 90s. Yes, the world is established. So we've already dealt with his creation. Now we see it here. It shall never be moved, and he will judge the peoples with equity. So say among the nations, this idea that we're supposed to declare among the peoples that he's been saying. I mean, sing the Lord a new song, sing the Lord all the earth, is verse 1. Bless the Lord, glory among the nations, works among the peoples. Ascribe to the Lord, this is verse 7. O families of the peoples. Verse 9, tremble before him all the earth. So we have the idea of his scope. Verse 10, we have the idea of his scope. Say among the what? Nations or peoples. The Lord reigns. So declare the sovereign reign of the Lord, because when you do this, it brings him the glory that he is due. And then the psalmist brings up a theme that he hasn't yet brought up. The judgment of God. Yes, the world is established. It shall never be moved. He will judge the peoples with equity. So sing to the glorious King, give to the great King, and then speak of the sovereign King. Speak with praise. Make declaration of this truth, that God reigns. So whether it's the sports analyst who's responding to a football player who has cardiac arrest on the field and says, I wish I had somewhere to go right now, or it's your neighbor. You know what they need to know? The Lord reigns. You do have somewhere to go. God is hurting with his children, and he's empathetic, and he inclines his ear, but God is not confused. God is not scrambling. The pieces aren't out of place in his divine and sovereign order. Because the Lord reigns. And then the psalmist is going to return right back to his preceding structure. Repeated invitation of worship. But then he's going to look forward. Verse 11, let the heavens be glad and let the earth rejoice. So here's the repeated word to indicate that we've got a new continuation of the structure, a line of strophes. Let the heavens be glad, let the earth rejoice, let the sea roar and all that fills it, let the field exult and everything in it. So now creation is praising God. So up until this point, it's the peoples, it's the families of the peoples, it's a little bit of the creation, understanding that the Lord is the maker, not himself made. But look who praises God here. The earth rejoice, the heavens be glad. The sea roar. Every time you hear a wave, it declares the glory of God. Let the field exult. Every time you see the wheat blow in the wind, it points us to praise. And everything in it. Then shall all the trees of the forest sing for joy. So now obviously we have some personification. And this makes sense. I mean, one day I will. I've not seen the California redwoods yet. But, how many of you have seen them? Okay. I mean, I know what everyone says. You got to see them. There's nothing like them. So whether it's those trees or whether it's the, puny pine tree I have in my side yard, blowing in the wind, they point us forward, cause us to look up. Then shall all the trees of the forest sing for joy before the Lord. Listen, for he comes. He comes to judge the earth. He will judge the world and righteousness and the peoples in His faithfulness. So finally, reverence the returning King. Sing to the glorious King, give to the great King, speak of the sovereign King, reverence the returning King. The creation reverences the King. Creation speaks of His glory. And this is constant throughout the Psalms. Creation serves sometimes as the entire reason a psalmist writes a psalm, seemingly. When I consider the works of your hand, the sun, moon, and stars. I mean, why did he write that? Because that's what he was considering. When I think about man, that you're mindful of him, that you've crowned man with glory and honor and made him a little lower than the angels. Why is he considering that? Because that's what he's meditating on in the person of God, and it astounds him. So the psalmist thinks of creation in terms of God's glory. But here's the question: how does the Apostle Paul think about creation in terms of God's glory? Creation itself groans. So it's not that the psalmist is wrong. The psalmist has an understanding of the creation of God all throughout the Psalms that declares the glory of God. But Paul, understanding both the glory of God in creation and the fall of man in creation and what it has done to creation, points us forward that yes, this creation is beautiful, this creation is glorious, and this creation speaks of the glory of God, and the trees shout for joy and all that, but it also groans. Why? Eagerly awaiting its redemption. So how can this be? How can it be that a creation that is beautiful and glorious and speaks of God's glory yet groans and awaits its redemption? How can that possibly be good? What's left for that? For He comes. Verse 13. Not like the psalmist thought. In my opinion, and other guys would disagree with me, and I could go into it, but you'd probably be bored, but in my opinion, I don't even think the psalmist is speaking messianically here. I don't think he has the Messiah in mind. I think he notes the presence of God in multiple ways. I think we see it in the courts. I think we see it in the temple. And I think now we see the presence of God in creation, and that creation brings Him glory. And so I think that's what the psalmist has in mind. I don't think the psalmist has any idea what God has in mind. That the second person of the Trinity would take upon Himself the form of a servant. We've made in the likeness of men. And He'd humble Himself. And He would literally come. And that through His coming, He would once and for all establish a rule and reign that is without end, made up of His perfect, equitable, righteous judgment, to recreate a new heaven and new earth that no longer groans, full of people who no longer groan. Because there's no threat of death, there's no sting of sadness. And sin is gone. Because He has come. And He has put an end to it. And He will live to judge. To bring every secret thing to judgment, whether it be good or evil. So the question I kept asking, wouldn't it be great to see that? We will. The beauty of God. The splendor of God. Justice among the peoples. A creation that no longer groans, but shouts. So, where do we go with our struggles, with our confusions? We go to passages like this because it reminds us that God is sovereign. And I think this psalm teaches us fundamentally about God's sovereignty, that God's sovereignty means both looking up in praise and looking forward in hope. Looking up in praise. Sing the Lord a new song. Sing, bless His name, tell of His salvation. Ascribe the Lord, families and peoples, glory and strength. The glory due His name. Say the Lord reigns. Let the heavens be glad. Sovereignty means looking up in praise. But behold, He comes. And so it means looking forward in hope. Sometimes we're scared of sovereignty because it means something's out of our control. But when we understand texts like this, we should realize that that's the greatest place for our life to be. For He reigns. And He has done all to secure us. So, my friend, say among the nations, say in your home, say in your place of work, say in your neighborhood cookout, the Lord reigns.